The Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch. Number 7. Encounters. After attaining the Dharma in Huang Mei, the Master returned to Cao Hao village in Shao Chao, where no one knew him. Another text says, when the Master left, he went to Cao Hao village, where he stayed more than 9 months. The Master then said to himself, in less than 30 or so days, I will go to Huang Mei. This would be the utmost in seeking the way. How could I hesitate? The time of his going, as given in this other text, is incorrect. There was a Confucian scholar named Liu Qi Lu, whose ritual propriety was profound. Qi Lu had an aunt who was a nun named Wu Qin Sang, or Inexhaustible Treasury, who constantly recited the Great Nirvana Sutra. When the Master heard it for a bit, he understood its wondrous meaning and explained it for her. The nun, who was holding the text, asked about a word, and the Master said, I cannot read the words, but you can ask me about the meaning. The nun said, if you do not read the words, how can you understand the meaning? The Master said, the wondrous principle of the Buddhas has nothing to do with words. The nun was amazed and informed the village elders, this is a man in possession of the way. You would do well to ask to make offerings to him. There was a great-great-grandson of the Wei dynasty martial lord Cao Cao, named Cao Shuliang, who, along with the local residents, strove to come to do obeisance to the Master. At that time, the old Paolin monastery was in ruins, having been burned by soldiers at the end of the Sui dynasty. A new monastery was built once again on the old foundation. The Master was invited to reside there, and he suddenly turned it into an abode of the treasure of the teaching. The Master stayed there for more than 9 months, when he was once again pursued by an evil mob. The Master escaped to the mountain in front of the monastery, and the mob set fire to the forest to force him out. The Master escaped by hiding in the rocks, and the rocks now show the marks of his knees and the design of his robe where he sat in the lotus position. Because of this, the spot is called Escape Rock. The Master remembered the Fifth Patriarch's prediction, that he should stop and hide upon encountering sympathy and a group, and hid in 2 hamlets. The monk, Fa Hai, was from Chujiang in Shao Chao. When he first went to study under the Patriarch, he asked, the mind is Buddha. Please favor me with your instructions. The Master said, for the preceding thought not to be generated is mind, and for the succeeding thought not to be extinguished is Buddha. That which creates all the characteristics is mind, and that which transcends all of the characteristics is Buddha. If I were to explain it completely, I could not finish in an eon. Listen to my verse, which goes, with regard to the mind, it's called wisdom. With regard to the Buddha, it's called meditation. When meditation and wisdom are maintained equally, all is pure within the consciousness. If you are enlightened to this teaching, it is through your cultivation of the nature. Its function is fundamentally birthless. The dual cultivation is correct. Fa Hai experienced a great enlightenment upon hearing these words. He gave praise in verse, saying, the mind is fundamentally Buddha. To be unenlightened to this is to subjugate oneself. I understand the causes of meditation and wisdom. By the dual cultivation, one transcends all things. The monk Fa Ta was from Hong Chao. He left home to become a monk at age 7, after which time he constantly recited the Lotus Sutra. He came to do obeisance to Huineng, but did not touch his head to the ground. The Master rebuked him. To bow without touching the ground, can this be anything but irreverent? You must have something on your mind. To what are you disposed? Fa Ta said, I have recited the Lotus Sutra 3,000 times. The Master said, "Even if you recite it 10,000 times, it won't help you understand the meaning of the scripture. You should practice along with me. You're undertaking this effort without understanding how wrong it is. Listen to my verse, which goes, 'Reverence is fundamentally to bend the canopy of conceit, so how can one's head not touch the ground? Have the illusion of selfhood, and transgressions are generated. Destroy merits, and one's blessings are beyond measure.'" The Master also said, "What's your name?" The monk answered, "Fatah." The Master said, "You are named Fatah, or Dharma penetration, but when have you ever penetrated the Dharma?" He spoke another verse which went, "Your name is now Fatah. You have diligently recited the Lotus Sutra without cease. Reciting in vain, you have only been emanating sounds. It is the wise mind that is called Bodhisattva. Since you have now had this connection with me, I will now explain Buddhism for you. Simply have faith that the Buddha was silent, that only lotuses come forth from his mouth." After Fatah heard this verse, he said in gratitude, "From now on I will be deferential toward all. Your disciple has recited the Lotus Sutra without understanding its meaning, and my mind always harbored doubts. Your Reverence's wisdom is vast, so would you please briefly explain the sutra's meaning?" The Master said, "Fatah, the Dharma is profoundly penetrating, but your mind has not penetrated it. The sutra is fundamentally without doubt. It is your mind itself that doubts. As you recite this sutra, what is its central doctrine?" Fatah said, "This student is dull of disposition and has always just relied on reciting the text. How could I understand its central purport?" The Master said, "I do not understand words, but try reciting the sutra for me once, and I will explain it for you." Fatah then recited the sutra aloud. When he came to the chapter on parables, the Master said, "Stop! The central doctrine of this sutra is fundamentally the causes and conditions and the appearance of the Buddhas in the world. There can be no parables that surpass this. What are the causes and conditions? The sutra says, quote, 'The Buddhas and world-honored ones only appear in the world through the causes and conditions of the one great affair,' close quote. The one great affair is the perceptual understanding of the Buddhas. The people of this world are delusively attached to characteristics externally and delusively attached to emptiness internally. If one is able to transcend characteristics within characteristics and to transcend emptiness within emptiness, this is to be undiluted, both externally and internally. If you are enlightened to this teaching, your mind will open up in enlightenment in a single moment of thought. This is to quote, open the perceptual understanding of the Buddhas. Buddha means enlightenment. This may be divided into 4 teachings. To open the perceptual understanding of enlightenment, to manifest the perceptual understanding of enlightenment, to be enlightened to the perceptual understanding of enlightenment, and to enter the perceptual understanding of enlightenment. If one hears of opening and manifesting, one should be able to be enlightened and enter. Thus, perceptual understanding of enlightenment is fundamentally the true nature becoming manifest. You should be careful not to misinterpret the sutra and have a mistaken view of some other path. Opening and manifesting, being enlightened and entering, are themselves the perceptual understanding of the Buddhas. And those in our school are no different. To interpret the sutra the way you do is to revile the sutra and vilify the Buddhas. That mind is the Buddha, fully endowed with perceptual understanding. What use would there be of any further opening? You should have faith that the perceptual understanding of the Buddhas is only your own mind. There is no other Buddha. It is only that all the sentient beings obstruct their own brilliance by the sensory realms of desire. Externally conditioned and internally disrupted, they take hectic delight in sensation. Then they belabor other world-honored ones to arise from their samadhi and use various harsh words to get them to stop. Don't seek outside yourself. You're no different from the Buddhas. Therefore, the Lotus Sutra says, quote, "Open the perceptual understanding of the Buddhas," close quote. I also exhort all of you to always open the perceptual understanding of the Buddhas within your own minds. The minds of people in this world are given to the false, and they stupidly commit transgressions. With good in their mouths and evil in their minds, they are lustful, angry, jealous, obsequious, and conceited, injuring people and damaging things. They open the perceptual understanding of sentient beings. If you are able to always generate wisdom in a correct state of mind, contemplating your own mind, stopping evil and practicing good, this is to open the perceptual understanding of the Buddhas. You should open the perceptual understanding of the Buddhas in every moment of thought. Do not open the perceptual understanding of sentient beings. To open the perceptual understanding of the Buddhas is to transcend the world. To open the perceptual understanding of sentient beings is to be in the world. If you only struggle to grasp at thoughts as your task in life, how would this be any different from a yak loving its own tail? Fatah said, "If this is so, then should one just understand the meaning and not bother to recite the sutras?" The Master said, "Can the sutras be in error? How could they impede your mindfulness? It is just that delusion and enlightenment are in the person, that harm and benefit depend on oneself. To recite with the mouth and practice in the mind is to turn the sutra. To recite with the mouth without practicing in the mind is to be turned by the sutra. Listen to my verse, which says, 'Deluded in mind, one is turned by the lotus. Enlightened in mind, one turns the lotus.' To recite the sutra without ever understanding is to be an enemy of its meaning. Be without thought, and one's thoughts are correct. Be with thought, and one's thoughts become false. If one considers neither with nor without, one will always ride the cart of the white bull." Hearing this verse, Fatah unwittingly cried tears of compassion, and upon hearing the words he expressed a great enlightenment. He told the Master, "From long ago until the present, I have actually never turned the lotus, but have been turned by the lotus." Fatah announced further, "The sutra says, quote, 'All the great Shravakas and Bodhisattvas, even though they think about it and consider it as much as possible, cannot comprehend the wisdom of the Buddha,' close quote. Now, you would have ordinary people simply become enlightened to their own minds, yet you call that the perceptual understanding of the Buddhas. I am not of superior abilities, but I cannot help but doubt if this is not to revile the scriptures. Also, the sutra talks about 3 carts, the sheep, deer, and bull carts, as well as the cart of the white bull. How are these different? I ask your reverence to explain these once again." The Master said, "The meaning of the sutra is clear. It is you who is mistaken. The fault of the people of the 3 vehicles who are unable to comprehend the wisdom of the Buddha lies in their considering. Trying to figure it out as much as they possibly can, they only get further and further away from the truth. The Buddha originally preached this principle for ordinary people, not for Buddhas. Those who were unable to believe left the assembly. They were completely unaware that they were sitting on the white bull cart, but went outside to search for the 3 carts. How much more clearly could the sutra say to you, quote, 'There is only the one Buddha vehicle and no other vehicle,' close quote. Whether there might be 2 or 3 or an infinite number of expedient means with various stories, metaphors, and sayings, these teachings all constitute the one Buddha vehicle. How can you not understand? The 3 carts are provisional and were preached because of the past. The one vehicle is true and was preached because of the present. I teach only that you should repudiate the provisional and revert to the true. After reverting to the true will also have no name. You should understand that all the treasures you have are dependent on you and are used by you. Do not generate the thought of being father, do not generate the thought of being child, and be without any thought of their use. This is called maintaining the Lotus Sutra. From eon to eon, one's hand does not let go of the text. From morning to night, there is no time one is not being mindful of it. Phata achieved a revelatory inspiration and leapt up in ecstasy. In verse, he gave praise, saying, "The 3,000 times I have recited the sutra are forgotten with a word from Huineng of Cao Chi. Not understanding the supramundane truth, how could one exhaust the diluted waste of so many lifetimes? The sheep, deer, and bull carts are provisionally established, to be well lifted up to the higher level of meaning, early, middle, and late. Who understands that he is within the house of fire is fundamentally the king within the dharmas." The Master said, "From now on you may be said to be a monk who is mindful of the sutra." Phata comprehended the mysterious purport through this and never ceased reciting the sutra. The monk Chitong was from Anfeng in Shaochao. First, he read the Lankavatara Sutra, doing so about 1,000+ times. But he did not understand the 3 bodies and 4 wisdoms, so he did obeisance to the Master and asked for an explanation of these doctrines. The Master said, "As to the 3 bodies, the pure Dharmakaya is your nature. The perfect and complete Sambhogakaya is your wisdom. And 1,000 billion Nirmanakayas are your practices, that is, mental activities. To speak of the 3 bodies apart from the fundamental nature is called having the bodies but being without wisdom. If you are enlightened to the fact that the 3 bodies have no self-natures, then you will understand the Bodhi of the 4 wisdoms. Hear my verse, which says, 'The self-natures are endowed with the 3 bodies. Generating illumination, the 4 wisdoms are created. Without transcending the conditions of seeing and hearing, one transcendentally ascends to the stage of Buddhahood.' I am now explaining this teaching for you. Believe clearly and be without delusion forever. Do not study by racing after it, and you will always preach Bodhi." Chitong said further, "How might I hear the meaning of the 4 wisdoms?" The Master said, "If you understand the 3 bodies, then you will understand the 4 wisdoms. How could you ask any further? If I were to speak of the 4 wisdoms apart from the 3 bodies, this would be called having the bodies but being without wisdom. This would be to have wisdom but make it into non-wisdom." He preached another verse saying, "The great round mirror wisdom is pure in nature. The wisdom of the universally same nature is without illness in mind. The seeing of the wondrous contemplation wisdom is not the result of merit. The wisdom that creates that which is accomplished is identical to the round mirror wisdom. The 5 and the 8th, 6th and 7th consciousnesses transform through results and causes. These are just names that are used with no true nature. If one's sentiments linger not in the places of their transformations, in profusion does one generate in the locus of permanence, the samadhi of the dragon. Thus are the consciousnesses transformed into the wisdoms. In the teachings it says, quote, "Transform the first 5 consciousnesses into the wisdom that creates that which is accomplished. Transform the 6th consciousness into the wisdom of wondrous contemplation. Transform the 7th consciousness into the wisdom of the universally same nature. Transform the 8th consciousness into the great round mirror wisdom. Although the sixth and seventh are transformed within the cause, the first five and the eighth are transformed on the basis of the result. Only the names are transformed. The consciousnesses are not transformed in their essences. Chi Tong achieved sudden enlightenment to the nature and the wisdoms. He then offered this verse. The three bodies are originally the essence of oneself. The four wisdoms are fundamentally the understanding of the mind. The bodies and wisdoms interpenetrate without hindrance, responding to things in accordance with forms. All deliberate activation of cultivation is false activity. To guard one's abiding is not true serenity. The wondrous purport has been illuminated by the Master. I will forever forget all defiled names. The monk Chi Chang was from Kui Chi in Sinchao. He left home to become a monk when he was 7 or 8 and intently sought to see the nature. When he paid his respects one day, the Master asked, "Where did you come from, and what do you seek?" Chi Chang said, "Recently, this student went to Mount Pai Feng in Hongqiao, where I did obeisance to Reverend Chen Sui, and heard his teaching on seeing the nature and achieving Buddhahood. Since I was unable to resolve my lingering doubts, I have traveled this distance to do obeisance to you. I beseech your reverence and your compassion to teach me." The Master said, "How did he, Shen Sui, phrase his teaching? Try to repeat it for me." Chi Chang said, "After arriving there, I received no teaching for 3 months. Because of the importance of the Dharma, one night I entered Shen Sui's quarters alone to inquire of him. 'What is my fundamental mind, my fundamental nature?' Shen Sui then said, 'Do you see space?' I said, 'I see.' He said, 'When you see space, does it have characteristics or not?' I answered, 'Space is without form. What characteristics could it have?' He said, 'Your fundamental nature is like space, in that there is not a single thing at all that can be seen. This is called correct seeing. For there to be not a single thing that can be known is called true knowing. There are no blue and yellow, long and short. Just see that the fundamental source is pure. The essence of enlightenment is perfect and bright. This is called seeing the nature and achieving Buddhahood. It is also called the perceptual understanding of the Tathagata." Even though the student heard this explanation, I was still not certain, and I beg your reverence to teach me. The Master said, "That teacher's explanation still allows perceptual understanding to exist, which is why you are unable to comprehend. I will now reveal a verse for you. Not seeing a single Dharma, but maintaining the view of non-being, is much like floating clouds blocking the face of the sun. Not knowing a single Dharma, but maintaining one's knowledge of emptiness, is just like the great void, generating lightning and thunder. When such perceptual understanding arises for the slightest instant, how can mistaken recognition ever understand expedient means? You should understand the error of this yourself in a single moment of thought, and the numinous brilliance of the self will be constantly manifest." When Chi Chang heard this verse, his mind became suddenly expansive in enlightenment, and he related a verse. "There is no reason to activate perceptual understanding, to be attached to characteristics and seek for bodhi. When one's intelligence harbors a single thought of enlightenment, how can one transcend the delusions of the past? The self-nature, enlightened to the essential source, illuminates the crazed currents of awareness. Without entering the room of the Patriarch, in a daze, going about with 2 heads. One day, Chi Chang asked the Master, "The Buddha preached the 3 vehicles, and he also spoke of the Supreme Vehicle. I don't understand these doctrines and would like you to explain them for me." The Master said, When you contemplate your own fundamental mind, do not be attached to the external characteristics of dharmas. There are no four vehicles in the Dharma. It is only that people's minds vary. To learn and recite is the small vehicle. To be enlightened to the Dharma and understand its meaning is the middle vehicle. And to cultivate according to the Dharma is the great vehicle. To penetrate all the myriad dharmas, and to be equipped with all the myriad dharmas without any defilement at all, to transcend the characteristics of the various dharmas without anything that is attained, this is called the supreme vehicle. Vehicle has the meaning of practice and cannot be argued about orally. You must cultivate yourself, not ask me about it. At all times, the self-nature is itself such-like. Chi Chang thanked Hui Neng and served the master until the end of his years. The monk Chi Tao was from Nanhai in Guangzhou. He requested the benefit of the master's teaching, saying, "Since this student left home to become a monk, I have spent more than 10 years perusing the Nirvana Sutra, but I haven't understood its message. Would your reverence favor me with your explanation?" The master said, "What is it you do not understand?" Chi Tao said, "I am in doubt about the lines, quote, 'All processes are impermanent, these being the dharmas of generation and extinction. When generation and extinction are extinguished, quiescence is blissful,' close quote." The master said, "What doubts do you have?" Chi Tao said, "All sentient beings have two bodies, the physical body and the Dharmakaya. The physical body is impermanent and is subject to generation and extinction, but the Dharmakaya is permanent and is without knowing and without cognition. The sutra says, quote, 'When generation and extinction are extinguished, quiescence is blissful,' close quote. But I don't know which body is quiescent and which body experiences the bliss. If it's the physical body, when it's extinguished, the four elements would disperse. This would result in a state of total suffering, and suffering cannot be called blissful. If it is the Dharmakaya that becomes extinguished, then one would be identical to the plants and rocks, and who would experience the bliss? Further, the Dharma nature is the essence, and the 5 skandhas are the functions of generation and extinction. There is one essence and 5 functions. If generation and extinction are permanent, if there is generation, then the functions should be activated on the basis of the essence. And if there is extinction, then the functions should revert into the essence. To hear that there is generation once again implies that sentient beings are subject to neither annihilation nor extinction. But not to hear that there is generation once again implies a permanent reversion to quiescence, which would make sentient beings identical to inanimate objects. If this were the case, then all the myriad dharmas would be contravened by nirvana and could not be generated. So how would there be bliss? The master said, "You are a disciple of the Buddha, so why are you cultivating the false views of annihilationism and eternalism of the heterodox paths? To explain the teaching of the Supreme Vehicle on the basis of what you have just said would be to imply that there is a Dharmakaya separate from the physical body and that one must transcend generation and extinction in order to see quiescence. Furthermore, you have argued from the Nirvana Sutra's doctrine of permanence and bliss that there is a body that experiences the functions. But this doctrine was preached on behalf of sentient beings who poignantly grasp onto samsara and are shamefully attached to worldly pleasures. You should now understand that the Buddha preached on behalf of all deluded people that the 5 skandhas conjoin to make their own essences and characteristics. Sentient beings discriminate all the dharmas as external sensory characteristics, taking generation as good and extinction as bad, and being swept along moment after moment. They do not understand that the dreamlike phantasmagoria are false, and that they pointlessly and crazily experience samsara. thinking that permanent and blissful nirvana is transformed into the characteristics of suffering, they rush seeking after it all the time. Taking pity on such people, the Buddha indicated the true blissfulness of nirvana. If even for an instant there is no characteristic of generation, and even for an instant there is no characteristic of extinction, then there will be no generation and extinction that can be extinguished. This is to have quiescence right there. But if when it is right there, one does not have the thought of it being right there, this is called permanent and blissful. This bliss is not experienced, and it is not experienced. How can there be the categories of one essence and 5 functions? And how could one possibly speak of nirvana, contravening the myriad dharmas and rendering them permanently ungenerated? This is to revile the Buddha and destroy the Dharma. Listen to my verse. The unsurpassable great nirvana is perfect and bright, always serene and illuminating. Foolish ordinary people call it death, and the heretics grasp at it as annihilation. Those who seek the 2 vehicles refer to it as unconditioned. Of all that is considered by sentient beings, of all the 62 heterodox views, it is the fundamental source. To falsely posit empty names, how can these be true doctrines? It is only those who go beyond thinking, who penetrate and are without grasping and rejecting. Thereby does one understand the teaching of the 5 skandhas, and of the self within the skandhas, externally manifesting the images of form and all the characteristics of sound. Considering all these to be universally same, like dreams or phantasmagoria, not activating the view of the distinction between ordinary people and sages, not forming an interpretation of nirvana, the 2 extremes of viewpoint and the 3 limits of time are eradicated. Always responding to the functions of the senses, but not activating the thought of function, discriminating all the dharmas, but not activating the thought of discrimination. Even though the eon-ending fire burns to the floor of the ocean, and the winds pound upon the mountains like drums, the true bliss of permanent quiescence, the characteristic of nirvana, is such-like. I have now resorted to words to explain it, so that you would discard your false views. If you do not follow this verbal interpretation, you may be able to understand a little bit. Upon hearing this verse, Chi Tao experienced a great enlightenment. He leapt up in ecstasy, did obeisance, and retired. Chan Master Sing Tzu was born into the Liu family of An Cheng in Chi Chao. Hearing that the teaching of sentient beings was flourishing from the Dharma seat at Cao Chi, he came to consult and do obeisance to Huineng. He asked, "What task should one undertake so as not to backslide and fall down the stages?" The master said, "What have you done in the past?" Sing Tzu said, "I have not performed even the sagely truth." The master said, "What stages would you fall down?" Sing Tzu said, "Without having performed the sagely truth, what stages can there be?" The master was profoundly impressed by Sing Tzu and made him the chief among his followers. One day the master said to Sing Tzu, "You should go off and teach somewhere so that the Dharma is not cut off." Sing Tzu thus attained the Dharma, then returned to Mount Jingyuan in Chi Chao, where he disseminated the Dharma and taught sentient beings. His posthumous title is Hung Chi Chan Shi, or Meditation Master, Extensive Salvation. Chan Master Wai Rong was from the Tu family of Chin Chao. First, he studied under National Master Lao An of Mount Sung. Lao An sent him to Cao Chi to consult Huineng. When Wai Rong arrived and did his obeisance, the master asked, "Where have you come from?" Wai Rong said, "Mount Sung." The master said, no matter what kind of thing. How would it come? Why, wrong, said. If you say it's like a single thing, then you're off the mark. The master said, then can it be cultivated and realized? Why, wrong, said. Cultivation and realization are not non-existent, but defilement does not occur. The master said, if it's only that you here are not defiled, then this is the mindfulness maintained by the Buddhas. You are such as this, and I am such as this. Prajnatara of Western India predicted, quote, beneath your feet will come a pony who will trample the people of this world to their deaths, close quote. What you should do will be revealed within your mind. Do not preach too quickly. Why, wrong, experienced a suddenly expansive conjunction with the fundamental mind. Thereupon, he served as Huineng's attendant for 15 years, becoming more immersed in the mysterious profundity day by day. Later, he went to Nanyue, where he greatly disseminated the Chan school. By imperial proclamation, his posthumous title was Chan Master Ta Hui, or Meditation Master, Great Wisdom. Chan Master Yung Chia, Xuan Chu, was from the Tsai family of Wen Chao. When he was young, he studied the sutras and sastras and trained in the teaching of cessation and contemplation, that is, concentration and insight meditation of Chen Chai. Through reading the Vimalakirti Sutra, he illuminated his mind ground. Coincidentally, he visited and discussed the Dharma with the master student Xuan Tse. Everything he said was in implicit accord with the teachings of the patriarchs. Xuan Tse said, from whom did you attain the Dharma? Xuan Chu said, I heard that there is a succession of teachers for the Mahayana Sutras and Sastras. Later, I became enlightened to the central doctrine of the mind of the Buddha by reading the Vimalakirti Sutra. As yet, no one has verified my realization. Xuan Tse said, attained prior to King Sounds of Dignity, becoming enlightened oneself without a teacher after King Sounds of Dignity. In both cases, this was the heretical path of naturalism. Xuan Chu said, may I request that you verify my realization? Xuan Tse said, my words carry no weight, but in Sao Chi there is the Sixth Patriarch, Great Master Huineng. Students assemble there from the four directions like clouds. You would certainly receive his Dharma, and if you would go there, I will accompany you. Xuan Chu then came with Xuan Tse to consult the master. Upon his arrival, he walked around the master 3 times, shook his staff, and stood still. The master said, monks are provided with 3,000 forms of deportment and 80,000 specific practices. Where have you come from, O one of great virtue, to generate such great self-conceit? Xuan Chu said, the matter of birth and death is great, and impermanence is rapid and swift. The master said, why don't you understand the birthless and comprehend that there is no swiftness? Xuan Chu said, the essence is birthless, and comprehension is fundamentally without swiftness. The master said, so it is, so it is. Only then did Xuan Chu do obeisance to Huineng with full ceremony. He then immediately said he was going to leave. The master said, now isn't this really swift? Xuan Chu said, the fundamental is itself motionless, so how can there be swiftness? The master said, who knows its motionlessness? Xuan Chu said, you have just given birth to discrimination. The master said, you have profoundly attained the meaning of birthless. Xuan Chu said, how can the birthless have a meaning? The master said, if there is no meaning, who is it that discriminates? Xuan Chu said, nor is discrimination a meaning. The master said, how excellent! But at least stay 1 night. From this time they called him One Night Xuan Chu. Later, he wrote the Song of Enlightenment, which was disseminated throughout the world. His posthumous title was Wu Tsang Da Shi, or Great Master Without Characteristics. At the time he was called Chen Chu. The Chan monk Chi Huang first consulted the Fifth Patriarch and claimed that he had attained samadhi. Living in a hut, he devoted himself to lengthy sitting for 20 years. When the master's disciple Xuan Ce was wandering through Ho Shuo, the area north of the Yellow River, he heard of Chi Huang's fame and went to visit him in his hut. Xuan Ce said, "What do you do here?" Chi Huang said, "I enter into samadhi." Xuan Ce said, "When you say enter into samadhi, does the mind of being enter, or does the mind of non-being enter? If it is the mind of non-being that enters, then all the insentient plants and rocks would be able to attain samadhi. If it is the mind of being that enters, then all the sentient beings who have consciousness would also be able to attain samadhi." Chi Huang said, "When I have entered into samadhi, I am unaware of the existence of the minds of being and non-being." Xuan Ce said, "If you are unaware of the minds of being and non-being, then this is permanent samadhi. How can you enter it or come out of it? If there is entering and coming out, then this is not the great samadhi." Chi Huang did not respond. After a while he said, "From whom have you succeeded in this teaching?" Xuan Ce said, "My master is the Sixth Patriarch of Cao Chi." Chi Huang said, "What does the Sixth Patriarch take as meditation?" Xuan Ce said, "What our master preaches is the wondrously peaceful and perfectly quiescent. The essence and functions are such-like. Such-like. The 5 skandhas are fundamentally empty. The 6 types of sensory data are non-existent. One does not enter and come out of samadhi. One is neither concentrated nor disturbed. Meditation is in its nature non-abiding, and the serenity of meditation transcends abiding. Meditation in its nature is birthless, and the thoughts of meditation transcend birth. The mind is like space, but it is without any thinking of space." When Chi Huang heard this teaching, he came to visit the master. The master asked, "Why have you come?" Chi Huang related the previous events. The master said, "Truly, it is as you have been told. You should only have your mind be like space, but don't become attached to the view that there is space. Your functions should be unhindered, being without mind in motion and stillness. The distinction between ordinary person and sage is forgotten. Subject and object are both destroyed. Nature and characteristics are such-like, and there is no time when one is not in samadhi." At this, Chi Huang experienced a great enlightenment. All that he had learned in the preceding 20 years had had no impact whatsoever. That night, people north of the Yellow River heard a voice from the sky saying, "Chan Master Chi Huang has attained enlightenment today." Chi Huang later took his leave and returned to north of the Yellow River to teach the fourfold congregation. A monk asked the master, "What type of person attains the doctrine of Huang Mei?" The master said, "Someone who understands the Buddha Dharma." The monk said, "Has your reverence attained it?" The master said, "I don't understand the Buddha Dharma." One day, the master wanted to wash the robe that had been bequeathed to him. Since there was no beautiful spring nearby, he went about 5 li behind the monastery, where he saw that the forest was lush and circulating with propitious energy. The master took his staff and stood it upright on the ground, and a spring flowed forth where he pointed. The water collected into a pond, and Huineng kneeled to wash the robe. Suddenly there was a monk on the rock who came forward and bowed, saying, "I am Fang Pin from western Shu. Formerly I was in southern India, where great Master Bodhidharma, and join me. Go quickly to China. I have transmitted the treasury of the eye of the correct Dharma and the robe of Mahakasyapa. It has been transmitted through 6 generations and is at Zhao Qi in Zhao Zhao. You should go and do obeisance to Hui Neng. I have come from afar and would like to see the robe and bowl transmitted from our master. The master showed them to him. Hui Neng asked further, At what endeavor do you excel? The monk said, I am good at clay sculpture. The master composed himself and said, You should try sculpting me. Fang Pian was unable to refuse, and after several days the sculpture was finished. The likeness was 7 inches tall and thoroughly wonderful. The master laughed and said, You only understand the nature of sculpture, but you don't understand the Buddha nature. The master reached out his hand and rubbed the top of Fang Pian's head, saying, Long will you be a field of blessings for men and gods. The master recompensed Fang Pian by giving him the robe. Fang Pian divided the robe into 3 parts. 1 part to cover the statue, 1 to keep himself, and 1 to bury in the ground. He vowed, In the future, he who will obtain this robe will be me appearing in the world. I will reside here and build new monastery halls. In the 8th year of the Chia Yu period during the Song dynasty, or 1063, a monk named Wei Xian built a hall on this site and dug into the ground, obtaining the robe, which was still in new condition. The image is at Cao Chuan Su, or Lofty Spring Monastery. Those who pray to it always receive a response. A monk cited Chan Master Wo Lun's verse, which goes, Wo Lun has a technique by which one can eradicate the 100 thoughts. The mind not activates with regard to the sensory realms, and Bodhi increases day by day. Hearing this, the master said, The author of this verse did not understand the mind ground. If you practice according to this, you will increase your fetters. He thereupon recited a verse which stated, Hui Neng is without techniques and does not eradicate the 100 thoughts. The mind is activated frequently with regard to the sensory realms. How could Bodhi increase?